less than 6 weeks away from Election Day, and Virginia will once again be a battleground with every seat in the General Assembly up for grabs. We've invited the candidates from all the House and Senate districts that represent the Richmond Metro to come on CBS 6 News at 7 here to talk about their campaigns. And tonight, I'm joined by Amanda Pohl, a Democratic challenger in Senate District 11, which includes much of southern Chesterfield, as well as Colonial Heights and Amelia County. Ms. Pohl, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Well, tell us, what is this election about?
So I'm going to tell you, I am a mom, a social worker, a former hospital chaplain, and I've been knocking on a lot of doors, as we were talking about while the commercials were going. And what I keep hearing over and over again about what this election is about is it's about people over politics. People are tired of politics as usual. They are tired of the same old in Richmond, and they want someone that represents community values.
But how does that come down to policy? Because most people, they'll go right into their camp and they'll say, well, I want this, and the other side says, I want this and this. So, for example, how does that show itself in terms of health care? What do people want? Medicaid was expanded and picked up another 400,000 or so Virginians 2 years ago. Is healthcare where it needs to be in Virginia right now?
Well, it's certainly not where it needs to be, and I do want to go back to talk about Medicaid expansion because, you know, when I was a hospital chaplain, I was holding hands of people who were dying while my opponent was fighting against Medicaid expansion. It's a very popular program, and it's a popular program amongst Democrats, Republicans, Independents, but no, we are still not where we need to be on healthcare. We need more affordable healthcare, and we really need solutions. What I've been seeing in Richmond, these politics as usual, is people who are putting Band-Aids on the problem, to use a medical term, putting Band-Aids on a symptom instead of really addressing the underlying issues with healthcare. We've got to look for affordable solutions for reducing premiums, making sure that our deductibles come down, and making sure that we lower prescription drug costs, because these are real issues in our community.
We will give your opponent a chance to respond to that next week when she is here. What about, for example, job creation, the economy? You mentioned infrastructure needs. Presumably those two could go together, creating jobs as well as saving some of Virginia's infrastructure. Tell us about that, what your plans would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk about infrastructure because I was actually surprised that that's one of the #1 issues that I talk to people about in the district. When I ask, what are your concerns? People say, I'm tired of the roads. I'm tired of
bad roads. Nobody likes a bad road.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. And what they're really concerned about is, folks in Chesterfield and Amelia and Colonial Heights, they can't get to their homes because, the roads flood. And they can't, they're repairing their cars constantly because of how terrible the roads are. We need to prioritize that. We need to fix that. And we have to do that at the state level. We're not investing the way that we should, especially here in Central Virginia. We need to address that. We also need to address public transportation and making sure that we are looking at more solutions for that. And that's going to be good for our environment. It's also going to be good for our community.
Yeah, I was going to say that ties into the environmental needs as well as perhaps your thoughts on alternative energy sources.
Absolutely. We do need to reduce carbon emissions. We need to increase use of electric vehicles. We need to make sure that we are bringing down that carbon emissions. And, truly what we need to do is look at climate change as a serious problem. One of the things that I've noticed is that we're building big developments, and part of the issue is that we're not considering climate change in those developments as we're building them. So they're being based on models from 10, 15 years ago, and so roads are flooding, houses are sometimes getting backed up drainage systems, and that's a big problem.
The LEED certifications for buildings would help as well. And you also talked about equal rights, you talked about women's rights. Do you feel there's been an erosion in Virginia? It would seem with the Democratic governor the last 6 years or so right now, that some of those goals would have been met, but are you still concerned about that?
Oh, I'm absolutely concerned about that. And, I'm sure you're aware, Virginia should have been the 38th state to pass the Equal Rights Amendment and ratify that into the Constitution, to the U.S. Constitution, and put women into the Constitution. My opponent was opposed to that and stood against that. Women are not in the Constitution. We do not get the strict scrutiny of the Constitution that some other folks do, and we need to be in the Constitution. So not having women in the Constitution right there shows that we don't have that kind of same equality that other folks do. We really need to address that.
And one of the issues that folks thought were going to be taken up during the special session, which was somewhat shortened, even though the speaker says it is still technically open, gun issues, some ways to end gun violence. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I grew up in Amelia. I grew up in Chesterfield and Amelia, and I come from a family that owns guns. You know, I've been around guns in my lifetime, and I know that there are ways that we can be responsible gun owners and we can also prevent gun violence. And so I truly believe that we need to be able to have those conversations about how we reduce gun violence. We need to make sure that we are looking at common sense gun violence prevention measures, and we need to address those. We need to look at things like background checks and red flag laws. We need to look at funding for gun violence prevention in our community. It's not something that we need to stop working on just because we say that we can't. If we're really honest and we're not being lazy, we can come together and find those solutions.
All right, Amanda Pohl, a candidate for the Senate District number 11. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
And as I mentioned, we have invited all the candidates on here, the news at 7. And once we do the interviews, we post them all at WTBR.com. Let's send it over to France.